This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Drink? Now, shall we begin? A quick bonus for my club members. There's been talk amongst certain literati that podcasts are replacing books. This is a chat with Roger and Antonia where we address the question head on. Do get in touch, I'd love to hear from you. But let's get on with it.
Hello everyone. Hello Roger. Hello Antonia. Thank you for joining me.
Ollie.
So for listeners who may be familiar with Antonia and Roger, because Roger's been on for the films and Antonia, I think you are due to come on to talk about Master and Commander, the film with Russell Crowe. But this is basically your first appearance on this podcast. Anyway, so for the listeners, we wanted to talk about, there have been some articles flying around talking about whether podcasts are replacing books. Now, here at the History Book Club podcast, that would be a very sad state of affairs. We wouldn't want that to happen at all.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to get Roger and Antonia on because Roger is often on podcasts and has just been through a book appearance extravaganza where you were on loads of podcasts for your book.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to this question, listeners, so it may be that Roger doesn't think that they're any use. And then Antonia has her own podcast and has her own book coming out. So I thought she would be useful to speak to as well. And I very much set up History Book Club podcast so that people would buy books. Now, I get that everyone listening won't do that, but there might well be a percentage who like the sound of what they hear and think, I'll go and buy it. And I link through to bookshop.org, which is a collection of independent bookshops. So those are the links in the show notes for listeners. And they offer reduced price books if you're part of their kind of group. And then it gives me a report and I can see that people are actually buying books. So that's encouraging. Not
good.
So, but Roger, why don't I start with you? Just because you are Antonia has written 2 novels, but her non-fiction book's about to come out. It's not out yet. So Roger, you've had the most recent experience.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I would say, first of all, I think there are podcasts and there are podcasts. That's my first point. I would say when, if I'm out, maybe, the example I have in my head is a family wedding I was at a couple of years ago. And I sat next to someone that who I'd never met before, who making chit chat, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm a historian." And his face lit up, right? And this guy was, I don't know, I forget what he did. And he said, "Oh, have you seen The Rest Is History?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. I think it's great." And we talked for about half an hour at this wedding about whatever it was, Captain Bligh or whatever it was he'd just seen on or listened to on The Rest Is History. Now that is a pretty rare thing. Now traditionally, if you say that you're a historian in situations like that, you get a blank look, and the ensuing conversation is stilted at best. I have in the past I have actually said that I'm an accountant because it's less embarrassing. So that is progress. I think in that respect, that the Rest Is History boys, and I think by extension we have ways as well with Alan James. I mean they have brought history to a mass market in a way that had not been the case, I think, um, since probably the history boom of the 90s. The first of Anthony Beevor's big books and so on, when there really was a history boom, and it's on the back of that history boom, for example, that I started writing as well, and many others. So we have to, be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That there are massive positives here to be had in terms of that, increasing that interest, and yeah, of course, a good number of those that listen to The Rest is History will not go out and buy books, but a proportion of them will. And they will find a whole new avenue of historical knowledge and enjoyment and all of that stuff via that method. So I think we have to recognise that first of all. Now, the second point I would make, and this may be something Antonia will come in, is that I think that the publishing industry itself has been talking a lot, almost talking up a non-fiction sort of collapse, and I'm not entirely sure it's there. I'm not entirely sure that the stats back it up. There was an odd peak around the COVID and so on, because that was a weird time for everybody. But I don't really think it is declining slightly, but I don't think it's as catastrophic as the industry says it is. So in a sense, I think we're a little bit chasing shadows. And should at the same time, as I said, I think respect the service that some podcasts have done to us all in terms of spreading the word about history.
Right, that's interesting. When you say some, do you think there are others that really don't help? Did you hear that? He's frozen.
Yeah, I think there are. We have podcasts. A lot of them will disappear. There'll be a natural winnowing out as people realise that they're not getting much traction or whatever it is. They're not getting the bums on seats that they want. So yeah, there's probably too many out there at the moment, and chasing too many punters, or too few punters rather. So yeah, I mean the big ones that have the big audiences, I think they are. That's where we should be looking. I mean, most of those are both beneficial for the reason I just said, and then at the same time, you could, if you tell too much about your book if you're lucky enough to get an interview on one of those platforms, then you use possibility that the listener might say, well, I know all about that now, I don't need to read the book. So you've got to tread a sort of fairly fine line, but I still think they're a force for good.
Do you find that? So you've been on trigonometry, which
Yeah.
has a huge audience as well.
Yeah.
Do you find you kind of, if you're talking about your book, do you try and hold back because you don't want to tell the story of your whole book? Because often these podcasts are quite lengthy. I think they're a good hour and a half on trigonometry.
Yeah, trigonometry is a good it's an hour and a half. Yeah, to some extent, but then again, it is an interview format, particularly that one. You're going into an open-ended. There's no sort of real structure to the interview that you just turn up and the guys say, okay, let's talk about your book, and so it's quite difficult in a way to sort of plan to hold stuff. As an example, sorry, I'm just sort of freestyling a bit, but as an example, with another podcast that I do, Battleground, with Saul David and Patrick Bishop, the three of us do that. And myself and Saul both publicised our books that came out in the autumn of last year on Battleground by doing a little mini-series where we basically talked about the subject. Now, we had discussions at the time about, is it sensible to do, like Saul wanted to do a 6-part series now, and I said, well, you're giving too much away, because anyone that listens to 6 parts, 6 hours basically of the author talking about their book, is not going to buy the book. So we did have those discussions then, but an hour and a half, I think you have to go into that in good faith and just hope that you spark a bit of interest in the audience.
Yeah. Okay, Antonia. What do you think about all this? Do you think that these 2 articles, I think one in the Times, so you probably know the author, seeing as you're a journalist at the Times.
I know of her, yeah, but I don't know her. So what do I think? I think that it's a catch-22 for authors, in the sense that the only thing worse than people not buying your book because they've heard too much is them not knowing your book exists in the first place, right?
That's very true.
So,
Yeah.
I'm a new non-fiction writer. I've written 3 novels. Sorry, Ollie, 3. You said 2, but 3. But like all of which, the sales were absolutely abysmal. So I've experienced the kind of misery of sending a book out into an indifferent void.
Well, big yourself up, Antonia. Why don't you?
But the non-fiction's going to be different. It's going to be great.
Well, it was a long time ago as well, we should point out.
It was. And also, I think one of the difficult things for authors is not only the sense that you're sending something out into the void, but the sort of sense of kind of almost helplessness, in the sense that you write the book, you write the best book that you can possibly write, okay? But it's not actually your job theoretically, or it didn't used to be your job to sell it, right? That's the publisher's job. That's why you give them all the money and you get your little percentage. The problem at the moment is there are so many books. There's so many publishers. There's a dwindling number of readers for good reasons and bad. And getting visibility is really hard. So in one sense, we can talk until we're purple about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But, I'm setting up as many podcast interviews as I can because, bad visibility is still better than no visibility, right? The other point that I would make is that, I've looked at some figures that suggest that although there is a decline in nonfiction, there's also a rise in nonfiction audiobooks, right? So actually what's really difficult, because I went off to try and look for some proper figures, and the industry gets figures through BookScan, but you have to pay for those. Actually finding figures that aggregate all of this stuff is actually really difficult, that shows you real proper figures for kind of across the board. Because the one thing that has changed massively in the last 10 years is it used to be, if you wrote a book, that's it, it's just the book. Now it's the book, it's the audio book, it's the ebook. These are all different things, and actually if you take them all together, I'm not sure that story of massive decline in non-fiction is as true as we think. People are listening more than they're reading, but they're still listening, you're still getting paid for that. So, like Roger, I think possibly the woe over the decline of non-fiction has been slightly exaggerated. But it is a challenging time. It's a challenging time for everybody. There's so much competition for people's time, and I think it's wonderful that people are listening to more history in whatever format. It's an amazing, brilliant thing. It's one of the great things of our time, that a subject that had become slightly moribund and slightly dusty has been injected with new life. And I mean, this is a very different point, but my daughter's doing A-level history and has just done A-level GCSE. And the way they teach those things these days, the fact that anybody is interested in history is a miracle, because the joy has been sucked out of it so comprehensively and completely by how they teach it in schools.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, it's horrific. I mean, I read her A-level coursework essay and I said to her, I did not know you were capable of writing such drivel. It was, and she was writing how they had to write it. It wasn't that, it's the hoops they have to go through to get the marks, deaden the subject so completely that the fact that beyond that policed world of how kids are taught history, there is this entire and vibrant universe of people getting excited about Alexander the Great and, the SOE operations, and everything in between is just amazing. It's wonderful. It means that the subject is alive and kicking and well. And that, will it have a percentage knock-on effect on sales of my books? Maybe. But I mean, the broader case for the subject that I love is, that it's healthy and invigorated by all of this. So, it's mixed. It's complicated. It's complicated, Ollie. It's like a good history book. There's lots of layers. Yeah,
the nuance is very. It's interesting what you say about the publishing industry, because I do find that a lot of decisions are made on kind of instinct and feeling rather than sort of cold hard data.
I'm not sure I don't know, but what I think they do, the other thing so Roger and I also run this history podcast together called History Book Buffs.
Yes, check that out.
Podcasts.
Yeah, check that out.
But one of the things that you get to do with the podcast is like esoteric, niche, short, sharp things, right? So we've just had, for example, our biggest ever one was about. I'd said to Roger, nobody will watch this. It's so niche, and it was about the Baltic Crusades and the Teutonic Knights, and much to his smug satisfaction, it's easily the biggest YouTube video that we've ever put out. Right?
Brilliant.
So, but if you went to a publisher, as a nobody, and I mean, we did base it on a book about the Teutonic Knights, so that, there is a market. But what I mean is, it is really hard to get those niche subjects away because it's expensive to produce a book. It's difficult to produce a book. There's lots of people involved in producing a book. So what you tend to find is a lot of the books are at least pegged to subjects that already have an audience. So my book that's coming out is about the Cambridge Five, and it's a new and interesting take because otherwise it wouldn't get published. But it's still about the Cambridge Five, right? So if I wanted to write a book about the spy techniques of the kind of 18th century court, I would struggle to get a major publisher. So what podcasting can do is be nimble and niche and introduce people to new and interesting stuff. And that's amazing. Yeah. That's brilliant. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Members of the History Book Club, please forgive my interruption, but I have an important request. A friend of mine, Ian Wilson Young, yes indeed, all surnames are double-barreled here at the History Book Club. Anyway, Ian is on a mission to Ukraine, whereby he purchases a pickup truck and fills it with medical supplies before heading out close to the front lines to provide support for those fighting the Russian hordes. This is an appeal for you to donate, even if it's a very small amount. I put a link in the show notes to the Just Giving page. Now let's return to the club.
I would say, I mean, with reference to your point, Ollie, about it being sort of hard-headed or not hard-headed and being, about feels and so on. I mean, it is a weird business, publishing, to be honest. But I mean, my feeling after having been in this crazy business for 20 odd years, is that I think it's become more hard-headed, if not the other way round. And essentially the bean counters are in control now. So back in the day, you had the sort of the gentleman editor who would sign a book about something very esoteric because he or she felt that this was something that culturally it was either culturally or historically significant, and it really should be done. So he or she was going to do it. And essentially they had the power to make that decision. Now really the whip hand is in the hands of, the marketing people and the bean counters. And it is all about, what the bottom line is how many is this going to sell? Now they work everything back from a very largely educated and informed guess about how many copies any particular book is going to sell. They work back from that, and the editors themselves, I think, to some extent at least, are sort of passengers in that process. They can make recommendations and so on, and make the case, but ultimately, I think the decision is no longer theirs. So I think it's actually, it is more increasingly hard-headed rather than anything else.
I think, can I just say, I agree with Roger, and I also think that if there is a continuing drop-off in non-fiction sales, that will only increase because increasingly they'll lose their confidence. They'll have to go through, tried and tested formulas more and more and more, which means we'll only get books about World War II, which is good for Roger. Do you know what I mean? Like, so they'll get less able to take big gambles and big punts on niche stuff. So I think that trend will only increase.
And the weird thing is, a lot of even in recent years, you look at something like Davis Sobel's Longitude. That was a massive success, and it was very niche as a subject.
Was the wager by what's his face? David
Gran.
David Gran. I mean, who would, if I'd gone and pitched? And actually, I love Anson's Voyages, like just absolutely one of my favorite things. But I feel like if I'd gone and pitched that, it would be like, do what? No.
Yeah. And that's sort of, we had that wave. I know it's a bit ancient history now, but we had that wave of micro histories. The sort of Mark Kurlansky's Cod and that sort of thing. I mean, that was amazing. I thought that was a really, really interesting, trend, and it's kind of died out now. But I really like the idea of what I just described. Of the sort of the very well informed and very well educated and cultured editor who is just willing to take stuff on that they think is really should be out there, rather than necessarily looking at the maths. But I think that world has probably gone,
but maybe
like so much else.
But maybe that's partly why we've got this little dip down in non-fiction, or in history sales, because there's no current micro trend, right?
I mean, non-fiction is quite it could be a DIY around the home. Yeah. It could be history. It can be cookery.
Self-help. It can be
cookery.
everything.
I think is quite big seller, isn't it? But
so that's true. We are lumping all of that in with our own pet subject. That's very true.
History itself on the wane? Is that included in the statistics? I don't know. I probably.
I didn't find. I went to look.
It's difficult to find the numbers.
I couldn't find the numbers separating it out. But I think that Sunday Times article made the point that if you look at the bestseller lists, they're not very history-ish at the moment, and haven't been for a while. True. And the numbers, when you see them, you'll see a number one if it's a sort of quiet week in, say, August or September, and number one is a history non-fiction history book. It can be like 1,000, 2,000, 2,500 copies. And you think the whole country? But then this is one of the incredibly frustrating things. I believe what happens is that those bestseller numbers don't take account of Amazon, because Amazon are horribly secretive with their figures.
Yes.
They don't take account, therefore, of Audible, right? So how many of those books are being sold as audiobooks? So they're completely distorting anyway. So it's one of the reasons I think why cookery books often show up really big on the bestseller lists, is because people tend to, I know I do, I buy lots of cookery books. I don't always cook from them, but I buy the fucking things. But I always buy physical cookery books because you want to be able to flip, and whereas fiction, I buy ebooks because I like being able to, do you know what I mean? So this is what I'm talking about, the different formats, and they play out in different ways, but they're not represented in ways that can be passed by authors like us, because we don't have access to the data. And the big publishers, I'm sure, can drill down in ways that make sense, but I think they probably still have to aggregate from sources, because partly because Amazon is just sort of horrible for this. As a back when I was a business journalist, Amazon was notoriously cagey. Like, you couldn't even speak to a press officer. Like, they were did not operate like a normal company. You can't talk to them. You can't get inside them. You can't work out what's going on. So, they're horrible at helping the rest of the industry that they've basically reshaped. Mm-hmm. And they started just selling books. You'd think they would, as an organization, feel some sort of kind of collective moral cuddliness to the rest of the industry, but do they? Bollocks. It would be useful if they were more open.
I'm not sure Amazon and moral cuddliness ever belongs in the same sentence, to be honest. But there we go. Maybe that's me.
I know. Maybe that's my sort of naivety at play, in the sense that publishing is one of those industries that is both an incredibly hard-headed, numbers-driven industry, but also peopled by people like us, and people who work within publishing who actually have an attachment to it that is beyond what it would be if they were making widgets.
That's very true. That's very true, and that's a little bit where I was coming from as well, with that, the sort of wish that it would be more open to niche and so on, rather than hard-headed calculations. But that it is what it is. So
Sorry, I'd be fascinated to know what you think, Ollie, though, because we tend not to interview authors on our channel. We tend to like do book reviews and stuff, although we are starting to interview them, but we've decided because of this problem, we'd maybe do it in a slightly different way. You interview authors and you have really big numbers. Do you feel as an interviewer that you have a responsibility to kind of keep something back, or like, how do you play it? What's your
Yeah,
thinking?
well, I remember funny enough, I was talking about this with someone yesterday, Shane from Spybury.
Oh
And
yeah.
great friend of the show. I'll put a link in for listeners. He's very good on spy books. But I was talking to him because I think on my first couple of interviews, I think I interviewed Andrew Lowney about his book he had written about Edward VIII and the Duke and Duchess, who then becomes the Duke of Windsor. And I basically spoke to him for about an hour and a half and went through the story, chronologically. And I felt like I had basically taken all the best bits out of his book, put them on the podcast. And I actually felt bad about it. So yes, I don't really feel comfortable doing that because I wouldn't want someone to simply listen to the podcast and not buy the book. So I do attempt to, in the 45 minutes I have, maybe draw out themes that are in the book that, but sort of test them a little bit or try and speak about other things that aren't in the book, just to try and make the book more interesting to a listener than a sort of chronological, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. That's what I try and do. And I'm sure I don't manage to be successful about it. But I know, having watched some podcasts where they'll talk to an author for, sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours, is a thing. And I think I would feel uncomfortable about doing that. Particularly, that's taking 3 hours of an author's life. And I'm not paying them to come on the podcast. So to take 3 hours of someone's life and interview them.
That's something I would agree with or concur with, that this model of ever longer podcasts. I suppose maybe Joe Rogan's at fault here, that he's his model has sort of been so successful that everyone wants to emulate it. But this is the direction that so the rest is history. Obviously I've praised them already, but they increasingly go down the route now of multi-part, multi-episode treatments of whatever subject they're doing now. Far be it for me to sort of tell them how to run their business, because I'm sure they're much better at that than me. Well, they obviously are. But I personally, I don't like that. I liked it when they used to do, a nice sort of self-contained hour on a subject. It still had the insights that you wanted. It still had that dynamic between the two of them. And, it was nicely self-contained. You could do it on a dog walk. You could listen to it in the gym or whatever, rather than having to then tune in to the next episode and the next one after that and so on. To me, that multi-episode model doesn't work. I don't like it. But as I said, I'm probably the outlier there. But I think there is that, that element that you talk about, that in a sense, podcasts getting longer and longer. That's something that cuts a bit wrong with me, and I this is partly where we've come from with the history book buffs as well, Antonia, isn't it? That we've decided to try and go the other way and actually do sort of punchy little 10, 15 minutes on a subject, and again try and be insightful and try and give something of interest, but do it as a brief rather than a long form. This is the nice thing about the medium, is that you can pick and choose what suits you.
Well, I listened to Dominic Sambrook being interviewed about his new book podcast. And his view on whether podcasts were eating books was that actually what it will do is remove those, I think he described, I'm paraphrasing, sort of pedestrian type history books, where they are simply telling a kind of, I don't know, the history of Turkey. And those sorts of books will go. But what historians will need to do is write books that have a sort of, I guess, interesting take, and particularly are written well and engage the reader throughout. those are the sorts of books that he thinks will continue. I mean, I guess.
Well, luckily, that's what we all write.
Yes.
So.
Of course. Yes. Because he used to, they used to interview authors, which they don't really do now, because they've got so successful. I guess they don't need to.
Well, so I was doing Spy Masters, which was I'm just moving on from that, which was purely interviewing people. And Roger and I decided we would try something different of not interviewing people. And doing effectively video and audio book reviews where we talk about a subject based on a new book that's come out. But we are actually going to do some author interviews now, I think, because they're also good. But
crucially in a different way, though, like as we said,
in a different way.
We are, like Ollie was alluding to before. We're not just tell us about your book. It's much more the strand we've called. I'm bigging it up horribly here. It's a bit self-promotion. Behind the book, to actually, what's the origin of the book? What was the influence, and so on. So it is deliberately, getting away from that, isn't it, Antonia? And this is your idea. Before you tell me,
well, it is, but
that was my idea.
But partly because when you interview authors, you have no control over if they're interesting or not.
Yeah, and the sound quality can be shit, and
the tech can be rubbish. And we wanted to do a video thing, so we're mainly on YouTube, and you can't rely on people's tech. And sometimes they're a bit dull. Sometimes they do. I mean, I interviewed this one guy who was wonderful, and the book was amazing, but he just, that thing where he just never stops talking, and you're the host, and you can't actually, and you kind of like you can't get in. So we just thought, actually, let's try and do something that isn't like that. And I think when I listened to Arrested History Club thing about it, because Tom and Dominic had such good chemistry, what they found is their numbers dropped off when it was a guest, right?
Interesting.
So they now have guests on the club, but actually what people were tuning on for was Dom and Tom, and Tom's kind of, slightly caricaturish versions of themselves bantering about history, and that's what they liked. And I said, and listen, I get that, because the other point that we haven't made, I think, is that there is a massive difference between audio and how people listen to podcasts and how people read books. And the books, they take attention, they take time, they take dedication, and that's a good thing. I think people listen. I had an interesting conversation yesterday with a guy who wanted to meet me and talk about doing some stuff about my book about the Cambridge Five. And it came up because I was on the Rest is Classified club talking about Kim Philby. And I was talking about Kim Philby's, how Kim Philby's betrayals affected the people of Eastern Europe, which is kind of a big part of my upcoming book. And the guy who I spoke to yesterday was saying that he was hoovering his house with the podcast in the background with only half an ear on it, because that's how you listen to podcasts, right? You're doing something else, and suddenly your attention wanders, and then it comes back in, and you go, it's not the same thing at all as reading a book. And he said, and I suddenly listened to what you were saying, and I realized it was what I wanted to hear for ages, somebody saying. So I rewound and I listened properly, and I ordered your book, and I got in contact, blah, blah, blah. So it was just an illustrative thing that actually people listen in different ways. And to circle back to the original thing of, like, as a writer, is it worth going on podcasts? I'm thinking, yes, you've got to go on, but you've got to be interesting, and you've got to give the people the case for thinking that this person they're listening to might have something to say that you need to concentrate on in book form.
Yeah.
Well said.
I completely agree. I mean, because actually I've gone back and listened, and I actually do like their series on Rest is History, but I've gone back and listened to, I think, their American ones. I think I've listened to two or maybe even three times, simply because I am also, I get I feel like with a podcast, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other after about a week. I mean, and that's not the case with a book.
That's very true. Yeah.
I agree completely. You the information lands differently.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that how your brain, your ears, obviously, I guess we're meant to be out on the prairie listening for I don't know, a leopard.
I once sold encyclopedias door to door.
Short term.
When I was selling these encyclopedias door to door, I would say to people that you retain 80% of the knowledge that you read on the printed page, and only, and compared to any other form, I completely.
You sold encyclopedias door to door?
I did, but I also made this statistic up, so I can't.
I was going to say, I sold calculators door to door, and
did you?
It was a miserable failure at that.
Yeah, I was pretty bad.
There's a delicious irony about you selling encyclopedias and making stuff up to sell them. That's brilliant.
I would say it with such sincerity. Did you know children retain 80% of what they read on the printed? I mean, I don't feel any qualms about lying because nobody bought the bloody encyclopedias anyway.
Love it.
So I think we've done this.
Digressing.
Yeah, we've done this. We've done this subject now. So basically, what we've said is that they are. I think we can sum it up by saying that they're two different forms of media, and one is a bit of fun, and the other enriches the soul.
Exactly.
100%. And if you want your soul especially enriched, buy Rogers and mine books.
Yes. Absolutely,
they're double enrichment.
And I hope you can come on the History Book Club podcast, Antonia, when your new book is out in a couple of months.
I'd love to. It's out in 6 weeks, Ollie.
6 weeks. Very exciting.
Countdown.
Okay, well, this has been great, Bo. Thank you very much for coming on and spending time to talk about this. And
lovely stuff. Thank you, Ollie.
Listeners, you've got yet another podcast / YouTube channel to listen about books and stuff. But this is my first bonus episode. Terribly exciting. So thank you very much for listening.
We've come to the end of this club meeting, so thank you for listening. If you want to get in touch about club benefits, please do, either by email or on X or Instagram. Links are in the show notes. I've also included my Substack link so members can read articles I've written on various matters that may be of interest. The History Book Club is written and presented by me, Oliver Webb-Carter. Music is by listener Chat DMZ. Episodes continue next week and every week, so please do join, subscribe, and if you can provide the club with a 5-star rating, we would be delighted. In the meantime, I thank you again, and now I have to usher members out into the real world. Until next time.